Well, my name's Ian Morgan. My qualifications, I should stress I have no qualifications in optometry or ophthalmology. I'm a basic scientist who became interested in myopia, which is my research field, because I was working on the retina, on dopaminergic systems in the retina, and I started to see some evidence in the literature that dopamine was important for myopia as well. Current affiliations, I'm a visiting fellow at the Research School of Biology at the Australian National University in Canberra, and I'm also a visiting fellow at the Zhongshan Ophthalmic Centre, which is at the Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, China. The issue of nature-nurture, genes, environment has been a controversial one in relation to myopia for at least the last 30 to 40 years. In 2005, we set out to challenge what was the prevailing orthodoxy, that myopia was almost totally genetically determined, with a very simplistic argument. What we said was, we've got plenty of evidence now that myopia is going up massively in East Asia. If something is tightly genetically determined, it can't go up fast. If there are no role for environmental factors, gene pools can't change very rapidly. So we said, this doesn't make sense. You have to modify our thinking about myopia to allow for significant environmental effects. And what in this article we've tried to do, there's been a major change in thinking, so that I think it's now generally accepted that there has to be a big place for environmental effects in relation to myopia. What we've tried to do in this article is to summarise the way opinions have changed, and then to explain why the previous orthodoxy, based on twin studies and heritability, but also ethnic differences in myopia and parental effects on myopia, that these were not conclusive proof of tight genetic control. Well, I think that change in thinking, now that change in thinking may have happened without resolution of the theoretical debates about nature and nurture, but I think it's going to be extremely important. We've now identified that there are two factors in this massive increase in myopia in East Asia, and just to give people a flavour for it, school leavers in China, for example, at least in Chinese cities, 80 to 90% now leave school myopic. About 20% of them leave school with high myopia. So this is a significant problem, both in terms of providing corrections, but also in terms of dealing with the pathological consequences of high myopia later in life. Now, once we've identified the two major risk factors, which are something to do with education and the limited amount of time that children in East Asia spend outdoors, then we can start to develop interventions based, first of all, on getting kids outside more. And this is now working it's been validated in clinical trials. It's now working on a nationwide scale in Taiwan. We can also start to think about changing characteristics of the education system. For example, one of the things that is characteristic of East Asian education is that children start doing lots of homework very early. The Chinese government, for example, has recently moved to ban setting of homework in kindergarten. Now, I think in Australia we would regard homework in kindergartens as something akin to child cruelty, depriving them of a proper childhood. But it's become so serious that kindergarten kids were being stressed with formal written homework. That's now been abolished, but still you have a very competitive school system with concepts of key schools, somewhat akin to the selective schools in New South Wales. Parents start positioning their children through very early intensive education to get into the right pathways for the right primary school, the right high school, the right university. And this puts a lot of pressure on parents and the children far too early. So one of the kinds of, in addition to getting kids outside more, one of the important reforms that you could think about is saying, okay, we're going to effectively minimise as much as possible competition. Let's abolish the key schools. Let's have a situation which, at least in the government sector in Australia, is more like the Australian situation. You go to your local school. You might start to get a bit choosy when you get to high school level, but primary school, you go to the local school. That would immediately reduce the pressure on parents to get their kids to be high performers so they could get into the right primary school. So it has enormous practical significance, a long way to go between recognising those factors as important and getting them implemented in practice. But that process has started. Time outdoors is now explicitly key to Taiwan's myopia prevention efforts, and the preliminary results, which are not yet being published, show that this is working. There's still a long way to go to take it back to the situation 30 or 40 years ago, but it's heading in the right direction. It's key to myopia prevention in Singapore, but whereas it's been embedded in the school system in Taiwan, in Singapore, it's been left to the parents to do. And the end result of that has been not much has changed in Singapore, whereas Taiwan's reporting positive results. I think we'll see over the next 2 to 3 years a greater recognition of the need for more time outdoors in mainland China, which is, of course, the big one in the picture because we're talking there about 1 billion myopes. Well, I think that's the first part of it. Getting kids outside more. It is a striking thing. Like we did a comparison of kids of Chinese ethnicity to try and get rid of ethnic genetic differences as much as possible. We compared Chinese kids growing up in Singapore to Chinese kids growing up in Sydney. And what we found is that there was a massive difference in the prevalence of myopia. In year one, the prevalence in Sydney was about 3% in the kids of East Asian origin. In Singapore, it was at least 8 to 10%, could be as high as 20 to 30%. So a massive difference. Surprisingly, at least to the Singaporeans, the only difference that was of a magnitude to possibly explain that was the difference between the amount of time that children reported being outside out of school. In Australia, it was about 2 to 3 hours outdoors, outside of school hours. In Singapore, it was about half an hour. And, so that as a near work, in fact, the children of Chinese origin in Sydney did more near work than the children of Chinese origin in Singapore at a young age. Yeah, it changes a bit as you go through schooling, but at a young age. And part of the reason for that seems to be that children in Singapore are under such educational pressure that they define things like reading as a school task, something they'll get out of if they possibly can. Whereas children in Australia learn to read for pleasure.